Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. This week, we're diving into the vibrant world of Paper Girls, an imaginative comic book series by Brian K. Vaughn with artwork by Cliff Chiang. This series intertwines coming-of-age narratives with sci-fi elements, and it's a thrilling ride that takes us through time travel and interwoven destinies. Joining me this week is comedian and bookseller Mary Jane French. Mary Jane has been performing stand-up since she was 18 years old. After starting her gender transition, she began cultivating material that captured her early experiences with transition and recorded it in a homemade special entitled Mary Jane French, Bearded Woman. Currently, Mary Jane is producing comedy shows in Richmond, Virginia with Traverse Comedy. This week, we indulged in a delightful drink choice, a warm, soothing apple cider, which is perfect as we slip further into our fall season. It's also a bit of a play on words. As Mary Jane explains, Apple products play a quirky role in the series that you'll just have to read to find out. Ours was a classic non-alcoholic version, but of course there's so many different ciders to choose from to personalize and make your own. I, of course, like mine warmed up with a cinnamon stick for a spicy twist. As always, if you enjoyed our discussion, if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with someone this week. Like, review, subscribe wherever you tune into this episode. I always appreciate your support and look forward to bringing more exciting conversations your way. All right, let's get started. You're a comedian and a bookseller.
Yes, one of my day jobs is I'm a buyer at a used bookstore, so I sift through everyone's old books to see what all the good stuff and all the moldy stuff. And
I see the same stuff too at the library, though.
Yeah, I imagine, because half the time when people when we are like we weren't able to put an offer on this, people are like, "I'll bring it to the library." If one of the things that we run into a lot, I have no idea if this is me revealing trade secrets or what, but
okay.
Just pulling back the curtain.
Okay.
Anyway, no, because we'll regularly, if we go through someone's stuff that we have to buy for the needs of our specific location, like when it's not always just, oh, this is in horrible condition. Sometimes this is something we have 15 copies of and we've sold 3 in the last year. So we're not going to keep piling on. And so we try to check with people as they bring their stuff in. Do you want us to return things that we can't put an offer on? Or do you want us to give you a recycling offer? Because sometimes, a lot of folks don't want anything handed back to them. Yeah. But also a lot of folks, when they come in, they either wind up with someone who doesn't explain that to them, or they are not paying attention, as we often aren't when we are going about. And so when they get the offer, they're like, I brought in 2 bins worth of books and it's only this much. And 2/3 of it was a recycling offer, which is like a couple cents a piece. So yeah. And then they ask for all of it back.
I know. Same thing here. I love booksellers, but we run into the same kind of things at the library,
I
for
would imagine.
sure.
Yeah.
People bring in boxes and you open it, there's a dead bat in there.
Yep, or they've just been, you're like, oh, where did you store this? And they're like, wet basement. I can tell.
Yeah, and then people don't think about the fact that it gets wet, it gets moldy, and then I don't want to sit in a room full of moldy books. Nobody does.
And the amount of bug parts I've had to just flap into the trash can next to me.
Yeah.
And so, it's gotten to the point where I've been at this gig long enough where I can kind of eyeball certain things for condition and be like, and then of course there's the smell test.
Yeah. People don't want to throw stuff away, and I
get that. What I try to, when I tell my friends, oh, you can sell stuff to our store, I try to be like, it's not really a way to try to make money. It's really you're going to get more than you would get at Goodwill. And so, like, you can trust that it'll probably be purchased by someone or pulped to print new books if it gets recycled.
Yeah. Exactly. And then I don't want to take up all our time talking. I'm like, let's talk shop. I've got so many other things to talk about with old books. But we are here to talk about Paper Girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was super excited. It's my first comic book for this podcast.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So you're opening up new doors.
I love a comic
all
book.
Of us. So yeah, who are you?
I'm Mary Jane French.
Yeah.
I've been doing stand-up comedy for 12 years.
Okay.
I host a couple open mics around town and also produce some comedy show, like booked comedy shows as well. And I try to help as many other folks putting together their shows also. Just a real quick plug, the open mics, they're both on Mondays. They're alternating Mondays. Okay. So every other week I'm at Garden Grove Brewing in Carytown, and then any week that I'm not at Garden Grove, I'm at Bottoms Up Pizza in Choco Bottom.
Okay.
And those are both at 7 o'clock, and sign-ups are at 6:30.
There you go.
Yep.
That's you.
We did a plug.
You did a plug. Okay, wonderful. And all Richmond, which we love.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, and Paper Girls.
Yeah.
What was your first experience with this?
So I first read this when I was 24, and I had just moved from Richmond to L.A., and so I had just moved across the country and was reading a lot of comics at the time because the L.A. Public Library I love all of our regional public libraries, but they have everything.
It is
I
Los
never
Angeles.
had to request them to get anything. and there's also like when I first moved there, I also was like, I want to get to know my new home, and apparently not just is it a gigantic city/county, it also like their library is like a thing. But anywho, I would borrow a lot of comic books, and one thing that I found about myself is that I love a superhero movie, and I tend to avoid superhero comics. I prefer like a more self-contained comic book universe. And Paper Girls is one of the comics that I was reading at the same time that I was reading Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Saga, and a handful of other things. Saga is actually the same author as Paper Girls, but it was definitely something that I was reading when I was like in a new city, didn't really know that many people, was getting to know people, and I borrowed all of it from my local library.
Oh, good. And you'll have to walk me through, because Paper Girls is a multi-series.
It is not a one and done. So I brought with me my copy of the compendium that is the complete series.
Very big.
So this is the complete series in one binding, but most of the time, so it is 30 single issue comics in how it was initially published, and then it has 6 trade paperbacks, and then I believe you could also get the whole story in 3 deluxe editions, or you can get what I have, which is the complete story in one bound, but so it's 30 issues. So rather than being something that was conceived of and then released in one go as a graphic novel, it was an ongoing series for, I think I was going to say 30 months, but I think it was actually 60 months, because for a period they were doing, 1 month was an issue of Saga, then the next was Paper Girls, and they were doing it on and off like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So and so Brian K. Vaughan is the author, and so they wrote Paper Girls and Saga at the same time. Yes.
So one of the things that I really enjoy about Brian K. Vaughan in general is that he has definitely taken a hardline, sounds severe, but he's put a lot of effort into being able to own the rights to his stories, and so he has deals with Image and a couple other stuff. So like Image is the publisher that did Paper Girls and Saga, and with both of those you can tell that it was important that he owned the story. And with Saga in particular, and I know I'm getting a little off track, but it was like very specifically, I don't want this to be adapted. I want this to be its one thing. Paper Girls has been adapted briefly on Amazon, but I really enjoy one of the things I really enjoy about comics, because like my background, when I was in college, I majored in, it sounds so pretentious, I majored in cinema, which is
What school did you go to?
I went to VCU,
Okay.
and when the program that I was in was founded, there was already a photo film program, so they needed a new word for what my program was, so cinema. And so I'm very about visual storytelling and all that, and one of the things I really like about comics, though, is that they're much less expensive to produce than films or television, and so generally they're allowed to get weirder. and you have less people working on them. Like instead of however many producers needing to get their hands in, you have the publisher, and then you've got the writer and the artist and the colorist and the letterer. So you've got 4 people doing the actual work, and then a much smaller entity, not a movie studio, but like a comic book publisher, maybe having an opinion about content.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, sorry, that was a ramble.
No, it's good. You're taking a sip now. What are we drinking today?
Yeah, we're drinking some heated apple cider.
Yeah.
Because when you were like, what is a thematically appropriate drink, this is maybe a bit of a stretch, but Apple products show up a lot in Paper Girls.
Literally
like Apple computers.
Yeah.
Because so it's a lot of time travel.
Yeah.
And it starts in 1988. And then they kick around quite a bit. So when they get to 2016, there's iPhones, but they also, before they ever get to the distant future, they encounter like a small, just a square thing with the Apple logo on it that is clearly a personal device that works with your brain, so you just see everything in front of you and is very sci-fi-y, and so you get to see a lot of different iterations of, they make a point at the period where they're in like 1990, when they're in January 1st, to the very early morning of January 1st, 2000. So they have a Y2K thing going on. You see someone get on the colorful Mac desktop, the like brightly cut, like the orange. Yeah. So yeah, they get to have fun with different eras of Mac or Apple products, and then they also do the future. One.
We can only imagine. We'll see what happens. Yeah, that's awesome, and I'm glad we tied it into the Apple. It's like one of the first actually cooler days. So
it is.
We're just sliding into fall. We're so graceful.
Just trying to lean in.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, talking about the story a little bit. I read the first one.
Okay.
It starts off in the day after Halloween, 1988.
Yes, Hell Night, Hell Morning, or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, the premise. Do you want me to go into the premise of the story? Okay,
perfect.
So it starts with, it's Paper Girls. So as opposed to Girls Made of Paper is like how you'd have a paper boy, but it's 1988, so it's established that it's like a big deal that they're starting to let girls have paper routes.
Right.
And our protagonist is Erin, who just got her route, but there's a handful of other paper girls in her town that she encounters on what is Hell Morning. So it's early enough that paper routes are being run, but also late enough that teenagers are still running amok from Halloween the night before. So it's very early morning, November 1st. And she runs into these other paper girls, and they wind up deciding to run their routes together, mostly just because they're like, hey, there's still a bunch of... Can I swear?
Yeah. Go ahead, go for it.
Okay, great. But there's still just a bunch of asshole teenagers in werewolf masks or whatever, Ghostbuster costumes or what have you, trying to harass people. So just trying to stick together. And then all sci-fi breaks loose.
Right.
And then they find themselves in the middle of a time war between the first generation who invented time travel and is trying to police it, and then that generation's descendants who believe that it is their responsibility to go back and try to fix things that went poorly. So these 4 12-year-olds in 1988 wind up finding themselves in the middle of and being a core part of a time travel war.
Did not expect it. And I was reading it and I was like, what's going on? All of a sudden there's, what is it, pterodactyls?
There are pterodactyls that go through the folds, which are basically the portals between time frames. And it's very a lot. It's very intense. I would say it verges on campy, and it one of the things that I really like about it is that it is, again, it's compact enough. Like, for a comic series, having only 30 issues, like, that's pretty compact. But also for, if you were thinking more in the lines of, like, a novel or a film or something like that, it has a lot of room to wander.
Yeah.
And so, like, narratively, one of the things that I particularly appreciate about Brian K. Vaughan's writing is that it is very character-driven, very dialogue-driven, very much about the relationships between all of the people. And it just has this backdrop of crazy plot. Yeah. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah. It pulls it all together. And so Aaron's a protagonist, but who's your favorite character? What are your favorite relationships too?
Okay, so I'm trying to decide what level of spoiler to give.
I don't know.
Who's to say? I enjoy Mac, who is, if we're looking at this cover here, Mac is the 12-year-old who smokes and has a bob.
She's the badass.
Yeah, she's a badass 12-year-old and who comes from a, difficult home life and is very rough and tumble as a result of it, but definitely over the course of the series gets put through the ringer emotionally and is forced to come to terms with the fact that she does indeed have emotions and also in realizing a lot of things about herself has to, in retrospect, change a lot of how she views the world. And also her relationship with KJ, who's the one with the field hockey stick, I think develops in a really organic and good way because KJ is also badass, but in a much more, like, stable way. Much less just railing against things and is more just, like, when Mac is an asshole, KJ's willing to be like, stop being such an asshole.
Yeah.
And willing to get into conflict with Mac. And it's also established very early on, like, Mac is in, like, within their little group of 4, she's got some status because she's the first one, like the first paper girl, the first one to get when she took over her older brother's route. And so it also, I think that also the way that they portray that in the first issue or the first couple issues does a really good job of how when you're younger and you find yourself in, like, a new group of friends, you'll have a first impression about someone where you'll be like, oh yeah, Mac's the badass who she made it so that they hire girls now, and Mac is, like, perceived with some authority, and then over time you're like, oh, Mac's the opposite of having her shit together. And you thought that because you're 12 right now. And I feel like the book does a good job of having that experience, that basically letting that experience play out in media, you know.
Do you find the characters to be authentic to 12-year-olds or?
I think so, and I think I was born 6 years after these characters are in time. Like, I was born in 94, but I in general find them accurate to 12-year-olds, generally speaking, and particularly to 12-year-olds pre-internet, pre-cell phones. I know that I'm one of the last classes of people that used a floppy disk, and I'm like, no, I feel like they're pretty accurate for that. And also I don't know if this is in I don't think it's in the very first issue, but it's definitely in the first, like, trade paperback, where they run into these teenagers that are part of a time war, and so these are the folks who are the descendants of the people they're at war with, and they're all teenagers, and basically they find out that it's these teenage boys who are, like, dating each other, and they're like 12-year-olds from 1988 Ohio being like, ugh, gross, and then one of them says, I forgot you come from a horrible time. And I thought that was, like, a nice thing to fold in there as we're not gonna ignore the fact that that's what, you know.
Yeah, the 80s especially were very...
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, talking about... Another question I always ask is, like, what's the vibe of this story for you?
In general, I find myself drawn to stories that take pretty typical experiences or scenarios and then just dial up to 11 and make the stakes life or death. And this is definitely you're starting to be a teenager and you find yourself in a new friend group and now the stakes are life or death because you're falling through time folds and oh my goodness, you met your older self and are having to deal with did you turn out the way you wanted you to turn out? And you're finding that out at 12.
Yeah.
And there's a great moment, I don't think this is a spoiler, where they meet Erin's older self in 2016. So I think she's 40 or so. So she's 12 in 88.
She's 40-ish.
40-ish. I don't need to make you edit the time where I'm sitting here counting on my fingers. But did I mention I used to be an algebra teacher?
Did you?
I did.
When was this?
Like a year ago, 2 years ago. Anywho, but she meets her older self, and her older self in 2016 is very a 2016 adult, so she's like dealing with anxiety. She lives in the same house that they grew up in, not with her parents, but like she's living in that house, and she's dealing with the fact that she's seeing her younger self and then 3 other 12-year-olds that she's long forgotten about. And so she takes a Xanax or whatever, and her 1988 12-year-old self, who was Dare around yet in 88? I don't know.
I think it was when Nancy Reagan was around in 88.
So there was a just say no mentality.
Yeah.
So her like 12-year-old self is like, oh my God, you're on drugs. Your doctor gave you these. It's okay. But basically she's, what do you mean you're not a senator?
Oh no. Poor thing.
And just trying to, and yeah, I don't know. I feel like it does a good job of emotionally getting you at 12, but then you reacting to life in general and having to navigate, like being like, okay, I have to deal with this, but also no, there's a giant tardigrade that's tackling another giant tardigrade, and we gotta not get crushed by that, so let's run.
Yeah, well, it almost sounds, and like I said, I only read the first one, but that they're making a metaphor for the experience of being 12 and being thrust into new school and new lifestyle, and
everything is bigger than life, and it's all life or death, and is all
which is the way everything feels. When you're 12
the stakes are very high.
Yeah. Everybody's looking at you. Everybody's, but the reality is nobody's paying any attention to anything.
No, not really.
But yeah, that is what it feels like. Let's see. And I also was curious. You said that you like graphic novels that are more like, is insular the right word?
Yeah, or like self-contained or less. I don't know. I feel like whenever I read, like I said, I enjoy superhero movies, but also I've watched pretty much every superhero movie, at least the ones that are going to be related. Like the first MCU movie was Iron Man, and I watched that in theaters. Like I know all of that. I'm good. But going into a Marvel comic, there's so many asterisks and see issue blah 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 of yada yada, and I'm like, I just want like a straight run, and so I'm fine with things being related, but there is a certain point where I'm just like, it just gets unwieldy. And so I do enjoy Image a lot. I like Boom Studios. I like a lot of comics that are like pretty self-contained to like their own universe. Like another comic that I really enjoy is called Something's Killing the Children, and that has 2 or 3 series within that universe at this point, but 2 or 3 feels manageable to me. And and what's nice about Paper Girls is that now that it's done, they could bind it in one volume. It's a big one, but it is one.
Yeah, and you can have it all together. And I did want to ask, did you watch the show?
I did watch the show.
What are your thoughts?
I found it very interesting because there was a lot of elements that they moved around. Like you mentioned in the very first issue, they show the pterodactyl-ish things, because they're not quite, if you say picture a pterodactyl, you're not picturing exactly what those are, but but when you see them, you're like, I guess that's a pterodactyl.
In fairness, I know very little about dinosaurs.
That's fair. But those pop up in the first issue in this, and not to spoil anything. Honestly, I would have been interested. Unfortunately, the show was not renewed for a second season.
Oh,
and so it
okay.
doesn't get to conclude the story. So we don't,
Oh.
I don't feel like I know how well it would have done, but when I watched it as it was going, I definitely found it interesting the things that they decided to shuffle around. I was like, okay, cool. They're not doing the dinosaur stuff because I assume budget stuff. Because with a comic, you just need an artist that can draw it. And with on screen, it's much more about CGI, and that is very expensive. And so I'm like, I get not doing the dinosaurs, and then at the end, like towards the end of the first season, and then they have them, and I'm like, oh, they just moved it around. They didn't get rid of them, and I found that interesting. But I also, Ali Wong plays older Erin in the series, and I feel like she did a really good job of playing an anxious 40-something in 2016.
Yeah. Yeah. Ali Wong's the best.
She's excellent.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. And we already talked a little bit about Brian K. Vaughn, and then he had a co-author as well, Cliff Chiang, but is it?
He's the artist.
He's the artist.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know anything else about them that we should highlight?
I should know more about Cliff Chiang because I really do love the art in Paper Girls.
Yeah.
But
Does he do Saga as well? Or?
No, that is Fiona Staples.
Okay.
Who is also the art in Saga is magnificent. And I do really enjoy that both of those series have the same. Well, and that's the other thing is that with these more indie IP comic series, they're more likely to have a consistent artist throughout as opposed to, I don't know, I find myself being very picky about art style. There'll be times where I'm like, look, I know I would like this story, but I can't stare at this for that long. And I've had times when I was younger where I would be reading a superhero comic and then they switched artists and I'm like, I'm not going to keep reading this because I don't like this art style.
Right.
And it just completely changed. And
they do that more often if it's a bigger...
Yeah, it is more common in like superhero comics for it to just, it changes artists and then it's, because they went on and did something else. Whereas with the indie stuff, the artist is more likely to be like a co-creator for it as opposed to it being like a legacy character like Spider-Man or something. And so it is more likely to be something that they can commit to more because they're like, this is mine. You know?
Yeah, and stick with it.
And also, similarly, and Brian K. Vaughn has so many... He's got enough clout at this point that I assume that's part of it. But I also assume that working with more independent publishers allows him to work on a timetable that is more... Because, like, in terms of... Like, Saga hit its 52 issue mark, and then they were like, hey... We're going to take a break for a while. They took a break for a couple years, I think. And they're like, but we're letting you know this is the halfway point. So there's going to be 52 more issues. And they've started running again, but then there'll normally be like a 6-issue arc. And then, we're taking a little break again. Not as long, but just doing it at whatever pace works for them. And I think that allows a focus on story that is preferable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that for sure, rather than being
just forced to churn out every month ad infinitum, and then also work however many other scripts you're writing, because I don't know how many titles you need to be writing to make a living as a comic book author. I have no clue.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do want to do a plug for creatives for sure, that we need to have people who can work a manageable pace and create and not be expected to churn out stuff constantly, because that's not how creativity works.
Yeah, no, it's deeply not. Yeah, and I know a lot of people who will intentionally, for that reason, they're like, before I even start trying to work on whatever project it is, I want to have X amount already so that I have that buffer where I can stop and still be putting things out and then try to catch up and then,
Right. Smart. Yeah. Anyway, good for him. I'm glad. And good for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting to enjoy that.
Yeah. Oh, man. I wish these were a little bit hotter.
Honestly, I'm a big fan of lukewarm cider. Which
Are you?
That
Okay,
sounds
good.
sarcastic, but genuinely, I love a sip it and it feels nice, but also I am very sensitive to a hot beverage.
Okay. I can get like very flushed easily. So it's probably better they're just a little lukewarm for us right now. Is there anything else about Paper Girls that you were hoping we'd get a chance to talk about?
I think if there's like a specific element that is... I'm just real enthusiastic. Like, whenever I'm talking to anyone about comics, I do eventually wind up back at Paper Girls because I think it is... I think there is a specific type of person that is drawn to the coming-of-age story. But I think that this is a coming-of-age story that is in a league of its own, where a lot of it deals with questions of... I'm having trouble remembering if it goes directly into is there free will, but there is a level of, do our relationships transcend our memory of them? If we don't remember something, does it still matter?
Wow.
And also there is, however much that if I'm doing armchair psych for myself, everything has to be about... Honestly, I'm shocked I haven't mentioned being trans yet, but I feel like it's every other word out of my mouth sometimes. But I do think that there is a certain level of vicarious childhood reliving for me with this story. But it also, I think, is, regardless of any gender thing, I think it's just like a really particularly excellent coming-of-age story.
Okay. Cool. And I guess that goes to who would you recommend it for? And
Yeah, if you're drawn, if you enjoy a coming of age story, if you are a Perks of Being a Wallflower fan or a Stand By Me fan, I would definitely recommend Paper Girls for that. And then also just, I think it would have done me a lot of good to have this when I was in like middle or high school.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people as adults get drawn to what they wish they had as in those formative years.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot about now we have so many more books than I had or we had or whoever had when we were growing up in the
It's the nature of
80s,
books.
90s, early 2000s, and we didn't even have a YA section. And when I was coming up, and so now it's like we have YA, and then we have stories from people of different genders or all kinds of different, and I think it's so important that hopefully we keep opening up the diversity of our storytelling.
For sure, and I definitely think that it's good that... Okay, I'm about to say something that is speculative.
Okay.
But I think it's a valid point, which is that I feel like whenever any new media comes forward, people are like, oh my goodness, it's going to be the death of books. Film is going to be the death of books. TV is going to be the death of books. And I think more so what it has done is it's made prose and books in general kind of pushed to an area where it's no longer... Like, now you think of, like, film or television as the, like, trying to appeal to as many people as humanly possible within one thing. And I feel like books I am trying really hard to frame this so that I'm not like, okay, it's been pushed off to the side. But also, I feel like if that has been helpful in the sense that rather than being like, oh my goodness, we need to have every book appeal to as many... rich people as possible or the widest audience in general. I think more publishers and in formats like comics or in anything, they realize they're like, okay, the way to actually sell more of these is not to go as broad as possible. That's very boring now. The way to try to get an audience is to find the niche and appeal to those people.
Yeah.
And I don't mean pandering, but just like allowing it to be specific, I think is really important and really satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And to find something that's, special to you.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm about to say is definitely something that is a thought that teenager me had about the Avengers, but I think it's still true, which is I can remember watching things like the first Avengers film where, narratively speaking, I don't know how familiar with the Avengers, the first one you are.
I'm medium of
So you know how at the end Tony flies a nuclear warhead into the portal and then falls out and he survives?
Yeah.
Narratively, I was a pretentious teenager being like, it would be such a better story if this took the actual sacrifice of him dying, but they're never going to do that because they need Iron Man to still make 5 more movies or whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the things that is very good for a medium when it becomes less mainstream or less mass media is that it allows it that freedom to be that more specific and to make harsh choices or strong choices or
kill your darlings.
Yes, exactly.
Murder them all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. I was trying to think of another example of that, and it was just another one where I'm like, they should have died. The Hunger Games would be better if it was one book and they ate the poison berry at the end and they're dead. I'm sorry if there's anyone here who's really been meaning to get to the Hunger Games.
Oh no! If you haven't read or watched it by now, it's too late.
Yeah, at a certain point, it's like, what, am I supposed to pretend that Bruce Willis wasn't dead the whole time?
Yeah.
Like,
we're just going to spoil
just
it
everything. Rosebud is a sled.
Oh my gosh. I did want to also, so you plugged the shows already. Is there anything else you want to put a spotlight on? Anything you've got coming up or something you're working on?
So yeah, I've got the open mics, and also I don't personally have like a personal social media presence, but I produce shows with some friends through the handle at Traverse Comedy on Instagram.
Okay.
And so if anyone's interested in seeing stuff that either I'm doing or that I am tangentially affiliated with, that is a good thing. Oh, and I also, one of the booked shows that I run with a couple friends, it's called The Roost. It's at Benchtop Brewing. It's every other month, assuming that we're recording this more than a week before this episode comes out. Then the next one would be December 14th.
Okay.
Which is a Saturday.
It is a Saturday.
Yes.
Oh, well, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
this was
absolutely.
fun. And I got to read a graphic novel, which takes me out of my comfort zone. No, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Here we go. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.